Purpose is the foundation of everything that exists. Nothing was ever created without a reason, and nothing ever came into being without a design. When you look at creation, whether it is the sun that governs the day, the moon that rules the night, the stars that give their light, or the birds that soar in the skies, every single one of them operates within the boundaries of its purpose. The sun does not try to be the moon does not try to be the sea, and the sea does not try to be the sky. Each remains within the assignment it was created for, and that is why creation looks so orderly, so powerful, so dependable. In the same way, your life was never an accident. You are not a random event or a mistake of history. You were born because God had a reason in His mind, a specific thought in His heart, and a deliberate design in His plan. You carry within you an assignment that no one else can fulfill in the same way, and that assignment is called purpose. When God thought of you, He did not create you empty. He never sends a product into the world without placing within it the ability to perform what it was created for. Think of a seed. Inside a seed, there is already the tree, the fruit, the leaves, the branches, and the potential for generations of harvest. The seed may look small, but it carries everything it needs to become what it was designed to be. The same is true with you. Before you were born, God already planted in you the gifts, the talents, the ideas, the resources, the wisdom, and the capacity to carry out your destiny. You may not see it yet. You may not even believe it yet. But the truth is that you are fully equipped from birth to complete what God designed you for. Purpose is not something you chase after. It is something you discover within yourself because God has already placed it there. This is why your existence carries weight. You were born with divine intention. God's power has been deposited into your spirit in the form of your potential. You do not need to ask Him to give you ability. He has already given it. You do not need to beg Him for worth. He has already made you valuable. The challenge is not whether you are equipped. The challenge is whether you believe that you are. So many people live life feeling inadequate, comparing themselves to others, thinking they are less gifted, less important, less powerful. But God never created you to compare yourself with another person because no one can compete with purpose. A fish cannot compete with a bird, and a bird cannot compete with a tree. Each one dominates in the environment it was created for. In the same way, you will only find your power when you stay in the lane of your purpose. This is where the presence of God's power becomes clear. The reason you were born with your specific abilities and inclinations is because your purpose demanded it. If you were created to teach, God placed within you the gift of communication, the ability to understand and to explain. If you were created to lead, God placed within you the power of influence, the ability to see vision and inspire others to follow. If you were created to create, He placed imagination and innovation in your heart. Whatever your destiny requires, you already possess the raw materials for it. God never calls you to do something and then leaves you empty. He places the supply within you first, and then He calls it out. It is important to realize that purpose is not simply about personal success. Purpose is about divine assignment. You were designed to be an answer to a problem in the world, a solution to a question in society, a healing to a wound in humanity. That is why you feel incomplete when you live outside of purpose. You can have wealth, fame, education, and recognition, and yet remain unfulfilled, because fulfillment only comes when you function in the reason for which you were created. True satisfaction is not in the abundance of possessions, but in the awareness that you are exactly where God designed you to be, doing exactly what He empowered you to do. This is why so many people rise high in life and still feel empty, because success without purpose is failure in disguise. You must understand that your purpose is not something you manufacture. It is not something you create with your own cleverness. It is something you uncover, something you discern, something you awaken to. Just like a manufacturer designs a product and places within it the ability to function, God designed you and placed within you the ability to succeed at your assignment. The power that you need to complete your journey is already inside you, waiting to be discovered. This is why prayer, meditation, and intimacy with God are essential, because they connect you back to the mind of the one who created you, and He reveals to you why you are here. When you look at your life through the lens of purpose, you realize that even your struggles and failures have meaning. The challenges you face are not there to destroy you, but to refine you. The pain you endure is often preparation for the very purpose you are meant to fulfill. God allows certain experiences in your life because He knows that what He has put in you will be revealed through them. You may think you are weak, But your trials are designed to show you the strength you never knew you had. You may think you are not capable, but it is in your moments of pressure that your hidden potential begins to surface. Diamonds are formed under pressure, gold is refined by fire, and champions are revealed in battles. In the same way, your purpose awakens fully in the furnace of life's challenges, and God's power within you rises to the surface when you need it most. Every time you doubt yourself, remember this: the fact that you are alive is proof that God has already invested enough in you to fulfill your destiny. He did not send you into this world unfinished. He did not place you here without a plan. He already completed your purpose in eternity, and then He sent you into time to walk it out. That is why Scripture says He knows the end from the beginning. He finished your assignment, and then He began your life. You are not trying to figure out whether you are capable. You are simply trying to believe in the capability He already placed within you. This is why when you begin to walk in alignment with purpose, you start to experience a flow and ease and a power that feels beyond your natural strength. It is not because you suddenly became great. It is because you finally tapped into the greatness that was always inside you. The key to living a powerful life, therefore, is to stop searching outside yourself for what God has already deposited within you. Stop waiting for people to validate you. Stop waiting for circumstances to line up. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. Everything you need to begin is already in your possession. It may be small now, but small seeds carry forests. It may seem insignificant now, but purpose always grows when you nurture it. You were born with divine design, and within that design lies the power of God waiting to be manifested. Your purpose is the reason for your existence, and God's power is the guarantee of its fulfillment. Your true strength is not in your education, background, or resources, but in the divine power that backs your assignment. Too often, people measure their ability to succeed based on what they can see with their physical eyes. They evaluate their chances in life based on their family name, their academic achievements, their financial account, or the opportunities that are made available to them. If they come from wealth, they assume they are advantaged. If they come from poverty, they assume they are disadvantaged. If they possess formal education, they feel equipped. If they lack it, they feel disqualified. But the truth is that none of these things truly determine the measure of your success in fulfilling purpose. They may help, they may open doors, but they are not the source of your power. What truly carries you to destiny is not what you have acquired by human effort, but the divine empowerment that comes from God to complete what He has ordained. It is easy to put confidence in human systems because they are visible and measurable. Society trains us to believe that degrees, titles, and possessions are proof of power. But history has proven again and again that some of the most impactful men and women were those who, by worldly standards, had little to show. Many had no wealth, no connections, no prestigious education, yet they shook nations, influenced generations, and left legacies that remain to this day. Their secret was not in what they carried in their hands, but in who was carrying them. When God places His power on a person, it elevates them beyond the limitations of background and resources. Divine empowerment makes ordinary men and women do extraordinary things because the source of their strength is not earthly but heavenly. When you rely only on what you can accumulate, you will always feel small compared to others because someone will always have more education, more experience, more influence, or more resources than you. But when you realize that your strength is rooted in God's power, you no longer compare yourself with others because divine backing cannot be measured against human advantages. The moment God decides to use you, there is no competition. His power becomes your greatest resource, and His presence becomes your greatest qualification. What you thought was weakness becomes the very platform where His strength is revealed. This is why Scripture says His power is made perfect in weakness. The less you have to depend on yourself, the more His power can flow through you without interference. Your education is important, your skills matter, and resources have their place. But they were never designed to be your anchor. They are tools, but not the foundation. When you confuse the tools with the source, you will constantly live in fear of losing them. If your confidence is in your degree, what happens when the field changes? If your strength is in your wealth, what happens when the market shifts? If your assurance is in your connections, what happens when those people walk away? But when your confidence is in God's power, you are unshaken by changes because the source of your strength cannot be lost, stolen, or diminished. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and His power does not fluctuate with circumstances. Think of Moses standing before Pharaoh. By earthly standards, he was disqualified. He had fled from Egypt as a fugitive, spent 40 years in the wilderness as a shepherd, and could not even speak fluently. Yet when God placed his power behind him, he became the deliverer of a nation. Think of David standing before Goliath. He had no military training, no armor, and no sword, but he carried something Goliath could not see: the power of God backing his purpose. The same God who empowered a shepherd boy to defeat a giant is the same God who empowers you to overcome obstacles in your own life. He does not need what the world says you must have. He only needs your obedience, your faith, and your willingness to walk in purpose. The greatest mistake many people make is underestimating themselves because of what they lack. They look at their family background and think they are disadvantaged. They look at their lack of resources and assume they cannot begin. They look at their weaknesses and conclude that they are disqualified. But God often chooses the weak things of the world to shame the strong, and the foolish things to confound the wise. He does this so that no one can boast in their own ability, but so that his power becomes evident. When people see you succeed despite your lack of worldly qualifications, they will know that it was not by your strength but by God's strength. That becomes your testimony, and your life becomes proof of his power. The reason many feel frustrated in their pursuit of purpose is because they rely too heavily on human ability. They spend their lives collecting qualifications and gathering resources, but deep down they know something is missing. That missing ingredient is the anointing of God's power, the divine hand that lifts your natural efforts into supernatural impact. Without it, you may achieve temporary success, but you will not fulfill eternal purpose. You may build empires, but they will crumble. You may gain recognition, but it will fade. It is only when your purpose is fueled by God's power that it stands the test of time and produces fruit that remains. When you begin to understand this truth, you stop striving and start depending. You stop fearing your weaknesses and start surrendering them. You stop comparing yourself with others and start focusing on the unique assignment God gave you. You stop worrying about what you don't have and start using what you do have, knowing that his power will multiply it. This is why small beginnings should never be despised, because God delights in taking what looks insignificant and using it for great things. 5 loaves and 2 fish looked inadequate, but in the hands of Jesus they fed thousands. A shepherd's staff looked ordinary, but in the hands of Moses it parted seas and worked miracles. Your little, when placed in God's hands, becomes more than enough. Every step you take in purpose requires you to trust more in God's power than in your own qualifications. This is the posture of true strength. It is not arrogance, not pride, not self-confidence, but God-confidence. It is the assurance that he who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. It is the faith that even if you feel small, his power makes you mighty. It is the conviction that even if you don't see the full picture, he has already made provision for every stage of the journey. This is what allows you to move forward when circumstances seem against you, because you know that greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. The truth is, life will always present situations where your education cannot solve it, your resources cannot handle it, and your background cannot support it. These are the moments that expose where your true strength lies. If your confidence is in yourself, you will collapse. But if your confidence is in God's power, you will rise above it. You were never meant to live dependent on your own might. You were meant to live dependent on the Spirit of God within you. That is why the Scripture declares, not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit. This is the secret to purpose-driven living, recognizing that your success is not anchored in what you can do, but in what God can do through you. When you embrace this truth, fear loses its hold on you. The fear of inadequacy, the fear of failure, the fear of not being enough, all of it breaks when you know that God's power is your foundation. You no longer walk timidly because you are not leaning on yourself. You no longer hesitate to step into your calling because you know the one who called you has already equipped you. You no longer measure yourself by earthly standards because you live by divine empowerment. And when you operate in this mindset, you become unstoppable, not because of who you are in the flesh, but because of who God is in you. When you discover your purpose, you also discover God's provision, because his power always accompanies his plan. Many people live in fear of lack, fear of insufficiency, and fear of not having enough to accomplish what they feel called to do. They hesitate to step into their assignment because they look at their resources and conclude it is impossible. But the truth is that provision is not something you must chase before you begin walking in purpose. Provision is something that follows purpose. God never assigns a mission without also providing the resources to complete it. Just as a manufacturer ensures that every product is supplied with what it needs to function, God ensures that His creation is fully resourced to carry out its assignment. The bird does not wonder if there will be air to fly in. The fish does not question whether there will be water to swim in. The environment and the resources were prepared long before they began to exist. Likewise, the environment and resources you need to fulfill your purpose were prepared before you were born. This is why when you align with purpose, doors begin to open that you could not have opened yourself. The right people show up, opportunities come, ideas flow, and resources align because you are walking in a divine current. Provision is attracted to purpose like rivers flow to the ocean. When you are outside of purpose, you often struggle and toil, trying to force things to happen with your own strength. But when you step into your purpose, you begin to see that what you need was already waiting for you. The problem is not that provision is absent. The problem is that you are not in position to receive it. Purpose positions you under the flow of God's provision, and once you are aligned, what once seemed impossible becomes possible because God's power is backing it. Consider Abraham, who was told to leave his father's house and go to a land God would show him. At first, he had no map, no details, no guarantee of what lay ahead. But he obeyed, and as he moved, provision unfolded. Every step he took in obedience led him to encounter blessings and resources that prepared him for the fulfillment of the promise. If Abraham had waited until he saw all the resources before moving, he would have missed his destiny. Provision did not come before movement. It came as a result of movement. In the same way, many people delay their purpose because they are waiting to see everything lined up perfectly before they start. But God rarely shows you all the provision at once. He shows you just enough to take the next step because He wants your trust. It is only as you step out that you see how His power has already arranged what you need. Think of the Israelites in the wilderness. They worried about food and drink, yet every day God provided manna from heaven and water from rocks. He did not give them a warehouse of food in advance, but He supplied daily, teaching them to depend on Him. In the same way, when you walk in purpose, God provides according to the rhythm of the journey. He does not always give you everything at once, because that would make you independent of Him. Instead, He provides in a way that keeps you connected, so that your faith grows and your relationship with Him deepens. You may not see tomorrow's provision today, but when tomorrow comes, you will find it waiting. That is the power of living in purpose. It synchronizes you with God's divine supply. When you live outside of purpose, you live in constant scarcity, no matter how much you accumulate. You may work endlessly, pursue wealth, gather possessions, and still feel empty because you are trying to fund a life God never designed for you. Provision is tied to purpose, not ambition. That is why some people can have great resources and still fail, while others with little in the natural succeed beyond expectation. The difference is whether or not they are aligned with what God ordained. When you are in purpose, even small resources stretch, multiply, and produce results far beyond their natural capacity. Just like the widow's oil that kept flowing as long as there were vessels, provision keeps flowing in alignment with God's plan. Provision is not just about money or material things. It includes people, wisdom, opportunities, favor, and supernatural doors that no one can shut. Often, the most valuable provision God gives you are people who carry answers you need, mentors who guide you, friends who support you, and even adversaries who sharpen you. When you are walking in purpose, God arranges relationships that propel you forward. He causes you to meet the right person at the right time, to hear the right word in the right season, to be at the right place at the right moment. These are not coincidences, they are divine provisions aligned with your assignment. When you look back over your life, you will see that even moments that seemed random were actually strategic connections God used to push you closer to your purpose. Another dimension of God's provision in purpose is creativity. Sometimes God will not give you a finished resource, but He will give you an idea, a vision, or a strategy that produces resources. He provides through the power of inspiration. You may think you lack finances, but He gives you an idea that generates income. You may think you lack influence, but He gives you a word that shifts hearts. You may think you lack ability, but He gives you wisdom that opens impossible doors. When you are in purpose, your mind becomes fertile ground for divine ideas because God's power flows through your thoughts and imagination. What you create in alignment with purpose often becomes the very provision for the next season of your life. This is why obedience is key. You cannot expect to experience divine provision while living outside of divine instruction. Many people miss their provision because they ignore God's direction. When He tells you to move, to give, to forgive, to serve, to step out, there is always provision on the other side of obedience. Peter discovered this when Jesus told him to cast his net on the other side after a night of catching nothing. Logic told him it was pointless, but obedience brought him into a harvest so large that the nets began to break. That miracle was not just about fish. It was about demonstrating that provision always follows obedience to purpose. Fear is often the greatest enemy of provision. Fear convinces you that if you step out in purpose, you will fail because you do not have enough. Fear makes you hold back, waiting for certainty, waiting for abundance, waiting for perfect conditions. But God's system does not work that way. Faith is the currency that unlocks provision. When you trust that His power backs His plan, you no longer wait for everything to appear before moving. You take the step, and the provision reveals itself along the way. It is like walking on a bridge that builds itself under your feet as you move forward. To the natural eye, it looks impossible, but to faith, it is certain, because God cannot abandon what He has ordained. When you discover your purpose, you also discover peace, because you stop worrying about provision. You know that if God sent you, He has already supplied. You may not see it all, but you are confident it exists. This is why Jesus told His followers not to worry about what they would eat, drink, or wear, because their Father knew what they needed. He assured them that if they sought first the kingdom and His righteousness, all these things would be added. In other words, if they aligned with purpose, provision would align with them. Worry is a symptom of misalignment. Peace is the evidence of trust in provision. Every great story of purpose is also a story of provision. Joseph rose from the pit to the palace not because he had resources, but because God's hand was upon him. Esther entered the palace at the right time not because she had influence, but because she was aligned with divine purpose. The disciples changed the world not because they had wealth, but because they were filled with power from on high. Their provision came from the Spirit of God, not from human sources. The same is true for you. The moment you discover and embrace your purpose, you unlock a flow of divine provision that cannot be explained by natural logic. It is not about where you come from, what you lack, or what stands against you. It is about the God who backs you, the plan He ordained, and the power He releases to ensure His purpose is fulfilled in your life. The enemy is not afraid of your talent or your dreams, but he fears the power of God that is released when you live in your purpose. Many people misunderstand the true nature of spiritual warfare. They assume that the enemy is focused on attacking their possessions, their health, or their relationships. While these are areas he may touch, they are not his ultimate goal. His true focus is always on purpose, because purpose is the very reason you exist. If he can distract you, discourage you, or derail you from discovering and fulfilling your purpose, then he has succeeded in neutralizing the very reason you were born. He is not intimidated by your potential alone, because potential without purpose is wasted. He is not intimidated by your talent, because talent without alignment with God's will can be misused. What makes him tremble is when talent, gifts, and opportunities are connected to God's divine plan and fueled by God's power. That is when you become unstoppable, and that is what he fears most. This is why the enemy works overtime to fill your life with confusion and distractions. He wants you to spend your years chasing things that look valuable, but are empty of divine assignment. He wants you to pour your energy into success without fulfillment, to pursue recognition without meaning, to achieve wealth without impact. Because as long as you are busy but not purposeful, you are harmless to his kingdom. You may impress people, but you pose no threat to the darkness. But the moment you begin to understand who you are in God and what you were born to do, you step into an authority that cannot be manipulated, because purpose backed by divine power carries eternal weight. Think of how the enemy reacted to Jesus. For 30 years he lived quietly, working as a carpenter, known only in his community. The enemy was not shaken, because the power of his purpose had not yet been released. But the moment Jesus was baptized and began his ministry, proclaiming the kingdom of God, healing the sick, delivering the oppressed, and raising the dead, the attacks intensified. Religious leaders rose against him, political powers conspired against him, and even his closest friends were tested. Why? Because purpose had been activated, and once purpose is activated, the enemy knows he must try to stop it. This is why often, when you begin to move in alignment with your God-given assignment, resistance seems to increase. It is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a confirmation that you are dangerous to the enemy. The enemy does not fear you singing, writing, building, leading, or creating in themselves. He fears what happens when those abilities are surrendered to God's purpose. A song outside of purpose is just entertainment, but a song within purpose becomes a weapon that heals hearts and draws souls closer to God. A business outside of purpose is just profit-making, but a business within purpose becomes a channel of provision for communities and a testimony of God's faithfulness. Leadership outside of purpose can exploit people, but leadership within purpose transforms nations. This is why the enemy is determined to distort, distract, and deceive. Because if he can separate your gift from your purpose, he can neutralize your impact. You must realize that spiritual battles are not about random attacks. They are strategic assaults against destiny. Every temptation, every discouragement, every delay is designed to keep you from stepping fully into what you were born to do. When you understand this, you stop wasting time fighting symptoms and begin addressing the root. You begin to protect your purpose with prayer, guard your assignment with focus, and shield your destiny with obedience. You stop being surprised by opposition because you know that resistance is the enemy's reaction to your significance. In fact, the greater the resistance, the greater the indication that your purpose carries weight in the spirit. This is also why the enemy uses fear so powerfully. Fear is designed to paralyze you before you even begin. If he can convince you that you are not qualified, not strong enough, not ready, or not worthy, then you will never step into purpose, and his mission will be accomplished without a fight. But when you refuse fear and embrace faith, you disarm his greatest weapon. Faith connects you to God's power, and God's power activates your purpose. That is why he trembles at men and women who refuse to be limited by fear. Their very courage is a declaration that they trust God more than circumstances. Look at the story of Gideon. He was hiding in fear, seeing himself as the least of his tribe, but God saw him as a mighty warrior. The enemy was not afraid of Gideon the fearful man, but of Gideon the purposeful deliverer. When he finally embraced his assignment and trusted God's power, he defeated armies far greater than himself with only 300 men. The enemy was not defeated by numbers or strength, but by one man aligning with purpose and releasing the power of God in obedience. This is the same truth in your life. The enemy fears not your smallness, but your awakening. He knows that once you rise to your purpose, even the smallest act of obedience can destroy his plans. Another reason the enemy fears your purpose is because it is never just about you. Purpose is always connected to others. When you step into your assignment, you set others free. When you walk in obedience, you inspire others to walk in obedience. When you use your gifts for God, you open doors for generations to benefit. The enemy understands that your purpose carries influence beyond your own life, and that is why he is desperate to silence it. If he can keep you stuck, he can also keep the people who are waiting for your obedience bound. But the moment you rise, the ripple effect of your obedience spreads farther than you could ever imagine. The enemy also knows that purpose carries eternal significance. Earthly achievements fade, but what is done in purpose lasts forever. A building may crumble, wealth may vanish, fame may disappear, but a life lived in purpose produces fruit that remains even after death. This is what terrifies him, that your purpose can outlive you, inspire generations, and advance God's kingdom long after you are gone. He fights purpose so hard because he knows it produces eternal results, and nothing can erase what is done in alignment with God's will. This is why you must treat your purpose with seriousness. It is not a hobby, not an option, not something you can casually approach. It is your divine assignment, and it carries the power of God to transform lives and advance his kingdom. The enemy will do everything to distract you, but you must remain anchored. Guard your mind against lies. Guard your heart against discouragement. Guard your time against distractions, because every moment spent outside of purpose is a victory for the enemy, but every moment spent in purpose releases power that pushes back darkness and establishes light. When you finally understand that the enemy fears your purpose more than anything else, you begin to see why your life has been under pressure. You begin to see why certain battles have seemed endless. You begin to see why opposition rises every time you try to step into your calling. It is not because you are weak, it is because you are powerful. It is not because you are insignificant, it is because a significance threatens the kingdom of darkness. Once you embrace this truth, you stop asking, why me? And start declaring, because of me. Because of the purpose I carry, the enemy fights me, but because of the power of God in me, I will prevail. Purpose without God's power leads to frustration, but purpose with God's power leads to unstoppable impact. There are many people who have a sense of direction, who know what they want to do, who feel they have discovered a vision for their lives, and yet they find themselves stuck, weary, and unfulfilled. The reason is simple. Purpose on its own is not enough. Having an idea of what you were born to do is only the beginning. The true strength to carry it out comes from God's power. When someone tries to fulfill purpose in their own might, they eventually come face to face with limitations, obstacles, and impossibilities that human ability cannot overcome. This is where many lose heart because they believe discovering their purpose is the same as fulfilling it. But the truth is that purpose requires power because destiny is always bigger than you. If your vision can be accomplished by your own effort alone, then it is not divine purpose, it is simply ambition. Divine purpose always requires divine power because it is designed to bring glory to God and not to man. Frustration enters when a person tries to accomplish divine assignments using human resources. You may have passion, but passion without power burns out. You may have skill, but skill without power hits a ceiling. You may have influence, but influence without power eventually fades. There are countless people with talent and dreams who end up living in cycles of exhaustion because they rely on their own capacity to make things happen. They hustle, they push, they strive, and still they cannot produce lasting fruit. That is because purpose without God's power becomes a burden instead of a blessing. It becomes work without grace, effort without results, activity without progress. You find yourself doing a lot but accomplishing little because divine purpose cannot be fulfilled by human strength. On the other hand, when you align with God's power, purpose becomes an unstoppable force. What seemed impossible becomes possible. What looked closed opens. What felt heavy becomes light, because you are no longer carrying it on your own. This is the difference between striving and flowing. Striving is what happens when you try to force your way into destiny with your own strength. Flowing is what happens when you surrender to God's power and allow Him to accomplish His plan through you. Striving drains you, but flowing energizes you. Striving leaves you exhausted, but flowing leaves you fulfilled. Striving produces temporary results, but flowing produces eternal impact. This is why Jesus told His disciples to wait in Jerusalem until they were clothed with power from on high. They had already discovered their purpose. They were to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. But even with that clear assignment, He would not allow them to begin without power. He knew that if they tried to fulfill that mission on their own, they would fail. They could have gone out and preached in their own strength, but it would have ended in frustration. Instead, they waited, and when the Spirit came upon them, their purpose became unstoppable. Ordinary fishermen became bold preachers. A tax collector became a gospel writer. A doubter became a pillar of the church. What changed was not their purpose. It was the power that came upon their purpose. This truth applies to every individual who has discovered their calling. You may know you are called to teach, to build, to lead, to serve, to create, or to influence. But without God's power, your efforts will feel like pushing against a wall. You may touch lives temporarily, but you will not create lasting transformation. This is why prayer, dependence, and intimacy with God are not optional. They are the lifeline of your purpose. They keep you connected to the source of power, the fuel that enables you to carry the weight of your assignment. The mistake many people make is treating their relationship with God as secondary to their work, when in reality it is the foundation of their work. Without His power, your purpose is just a dream on paper. With His power, your purpose becomes a living reality that impacts lives and outlives you. One of the reasons purpose without power becomes frustrating is because of the resistance it always attracts. Every true purpose will face opposition, obstacles, and battles. The greater your assignment, the greater the warfare that comes against it. If you try to fight these battles in your own strength, you will be crushed. But when God's power is upon you, opposition becomes an opportunity for His glory to be revealed. Giants may rise against you, but His power gives you the ability to slay them. Storms may rage, but His power gives you peace in the midst of them. Red seas may block your way, but His power parts them. Every obstacle that was meant to stop you becomes a platform for God's power to manifest, and this is what makes your purpose unstoppable. Purpose with God's power is not about ease, it is about effectiveness. It does not mean life will be without challenges, but it does mean challenges cannot stop you. It does not mean you will never feel weak, but it does mean His strength will be perfected in your weakness. It does not mean the road will always be smooth, but it does mean you will always have the grace to keep walking. And that grace is the difference between those who burn out and those who shine on. Grace does not remove responsibility, but it empowers you to fulfill it. Grace does not eliminate effort, but it multiplies its results. Grace does not exempt you from trials, but it guarantees that trials will not defeat you. That is why when God's power is upon your purpose, you begin to accomplish more with less, because it is not by might nor by power, but by His Spirit. Purpose without power also isolates you, because you think everything depends on you. You carry the weight of outcomes, the pressure of results, and the burden of making everything succeed. But purpose with God's power liberates you, because you realize you are only a vessel. The results are in His hands, and your responsibility is obedience. That realization removes anxiety and replaces it with peace. You no longer wake up striving to prove yourself. You wake up resting in His ability to use you. That shift transforms your life. You no longer measure success by numbers, applause, or recognition, but by faithfulness to the assignment and by the evidence of God's power working through you. There are countless stories of individuals who discovered this truth. Men and women who were ordinary, flawed, and limited, but who accomplished extraordinary things because they allowed God's power to fuel their purpose. Noah built an ark that saved generations, not because of engineering expertise, but because of divine instruction and divine empowerment. Esther saved her people not because of political influence, but because God's power positioned her for such a time as that. Paul turned the world upside down with the gospel, not because of eloquence alone, but because he declared that his message was not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power. In every case, it was not purpose alone that produced results, but purpose joined with power. You too must understand that the purpose within you is not meant to be carried by your strength. It is too great for your abilities, too weighty for your capacity, too vast for your resources. That is why God gave you His Spirit, to ensure that what He designed for you can only be fulfilled by Him working through you. That is why you must remain connected, dependent, and surrendered, because the moment you disconnect, frustration enters. But as long as you remain connected, impact flows. You were never meant to live a frustrated life of striving. You were meant to live a fruitful life of power. Your purpose is not just a dream to be admired, it is a divine assignment to be fulfilled, and only His power makes that possible. When you walk in purpose with God's power, you become a force the enemy cannot stop, circumstances cannot contain, and limitations cannot restrain. You become evidence that ordinary vessels can carry extraordinary assignments, that weakness can be clothed with strength, and that purpose fueled by divine power produces unstoppable impact. This is the secret of true fulfillment, not simply knowing what you were born to do, but relying on God's power to accomplish it through you. Walking in your purpose is not about striving in your own ability. It is about depending on the power of God to accomplish what only He can do through you. Too many people confuse purpose with performance, as if living out their assignment is about how much they can achieve through effort, hustle, and human ability. The truth is, your purpose is too divine to be fulfilled by natural effort. It was never designed to be carried by your limited capacity. It was designed to be carried by the unlimited strength of God working through you. That is why every attempt to fulfill purpose without Him ends in burnout, exhaustion, and disappointment. You were not built to succeed without Him, and He did not create you to live independent of His Spirit. He placed purpose inside of you, but He also gave you His power to bring it to pass so that the glory would always return to Him. When you walk in your own ability, life becomes a competition of performance. You compare yourself with others, you measure yourself by human standards, and you pressure yourself to make things happen faster than God intended. But when you walk in His power, you realize that you are only a vessel, an instrument through which He accomplishes His will. This understanding frees you from the heavy burden of trying to do everything in your own strength. It gives you rest in the middle of activity, because you know that the results are not in your hands but in His. The most dangerous place a person can live is outside of dependence on God, because it makes them believe they are the source of their success. But the most secure place to live is in absolute surrender to His power, because it positions you to do what would otherwise be impossible. Purpose without dependence leads to pride, because you start thinking you are the one who produces results. You look at your skills, your intelligence, your connections, and you take credit for outcomes that only God could have orchestrated. But true purpose requires humility, because it reminds you daily that without Him you can do nothing. This humility is not weakness, it is strength under authority. It is knowing that your gift may open doors, but it is God's power that sustains you in those doors. It is recognizing that your vision may be clear, but it is God's power that provides the resources, the favor, and the strength to bring it to completion. This is why Scripture says, "It is not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit." God is not asking you to strive, He is asking you to abide. He is not calling you to perform in your strength. He is calling you to surrender to His. Every assignment that comes from God will stretch you beyond your limits. If your purpose feels too big for you, that is a sign that it is divine. God never gives small purposes because His glory is never small. He always calls you into something greater than yourself so that you will depend on Him. If your dream can be fulfilled by your ability, it is not from God. But if it overwhelms you, if it looks impossible, if it scares you, then it is likely divine because only His power can make it possible. That is why dependence is not optional. It is the only way to fulfill your calling. Every giant that stands before you is not there to defeat you, but to prove that His power is greater than your weakness. Every obstacle you encounter is not there to stop you, but to show you the difference between what you can do and what He can do. Walking in purpose through God's power also changes the way you handle delays and challenges. When you rely on your own ability, delays frustrate you because you think time is being wasted. But when you rely on His power, you understand that timing belongs to Him, and that preparation is part of the process. What looks like a delay is often God aligning the right resources, people, and opportunities so that when the moment comes, you step into it with grace and strength. Challenges no longer break you because you know they are opportunities for His strength to be revealed. Paul understood this when he said, "When I am weak, then I am strong," because he knew weakness created room for God's power to manifest. Dependence allows you to stop fearing your limitations and start celebrating them because they force you to lean on Him. Another reason dependence on God's power is essential is because your purpose is not just about you. It is about the lives you are called to touch, the generations you are called to impact, and the legacy you are meant to leave. If you depend on yourself, the fruit of your life will be temporary and shallow. But if you depend on God, the fruit of your life will be eternal and transformative. Think about Moses. He was not eloquent. He doubted himself, and he even tried to refuse the assignment. But because he relied on God's power, he delivered an entire nation. Think about Gideon. He called himself the least in his family, but because he depended on God, he defeated armies far greater than his own. Think about Mary, an ordinary young woman with no qualifications, yet through dependence she carried the Son of God. None of these fulfilled their purpose by their own strength. All of them fulfilled it by surrendering to divine power. When you walk in dependence, you also begin to see miracles as a natural part of your journey. What others call impossible becomes possible because you are not relying on human systems alone. God's power opens doors you could never open, provides resources you could never gather, and connects you to people you could never reach. Purpose requires provision, but provision follows power. That is why Jesus told His disciples not to worry about what they would eat, drink, or wear, because if they sought first the kingdom and aligned with His power, everything else would be added. The provision you need for your purpose is already waiting on the other side of your dependence. Dependence also keeps you from the trap of burnout. Many people burn out not because their purpose was wrong, but because their source was wrong. They ran on passion instead of power, and passion without power eventually runs dry. But when you live by dependence, you never run out of fuel, because your source is unlimited. Prayer becomes your recharge station, worship becomes your oxygen, and obedience becomes your strength. You stop running in circles trying to do everything, and instead walk in step with God, allowing Him to guide your pace and your progress. This rhythm of dependence gives you peace, even in the midst of heavy responsibility, because you know you are not carrying it alone. Dependence also protects you from distraction. When you rely on yourself, you are easily swayed by opinions, pressure, and the temptation to prove yourself. But when you rely on God, your focus is fixed. You do not move because of applause, and you do not quit because of criticism. You stay grounded because your confidence is not in results or recognition, but in the one who sent you. Dependence anchors you so that storms cannot uproot you and setbacks cannot derail you. It keeps you consistent, faithful, and unshaken because you know the one who began a good work and you will complete it through His power. In the end, walking in your purpose is never about how strong, smart, or capable you are. It is about how surrendered you are. God is not looking for the most talented, the most educated, or the most connected. He is looking for those who will yield. Yielded vessels become powerful vessels because God can pour himself through them without resistance. The more you depend, the more his power flows. The more you surrender, the more he accomplishes through you. And when people look at your life, they will not say, "Look what you did," but "Look what God did through you." That is the ultimate testimony of purpose. Not that you fulfilled it in your own ability, but that his power accomplished it through you in ways you never could have imagined. My friends, let me leave you with this. You were not created to exist without reason. You were designed with divine intent. God hid your purpose inside of you before he ever gave you breath, and he equipped you with his own power to bring it to pass. Purpose is not a hobby. It is the very assignment that heaven deposited in your spirit. And when you embrace that assignment, when you surrender to the power of God, instead of striving in your own strength, your life becomes unstoppable. Every resource you will ever need is tied to your purpose. Every open door you have been praying for is connected to your obedience. Every breakthrough you desire is waiting on your surrender. This is why the enemy fears your discovery of purpose, because the moment you align with it and depend on God's power, you become a threat to darkness and a blessing to the earth. You were not born to simply survive, you were born to manifest destiny. So rise above the excuses, rise above the doubts. Rise above the fears that have been whispering that you are not enough. You are more than enough, not because of your ability, but because of his power working in you. Step boldly into what God has ordained for you, knowing that heaven backs your every move when you walk in obedience. Purpose is not just about you. It is about the lives waiting to be transformed because you decided to walk in alignment with God's plan. Therefore, live with confidence, live with clarity, and live with courage. Your future is not a mystery when your purpose is known. And your purpose is not impossible when God's power is flowing through you. May you never settle for less than what God placed in you. May you finish your race with joy. And may your life declare to the world that God's power is the key to every purpose he has planted in the human heart.